Paul.
Hello, Andrea.
I am excited to continue the conversation today since you're such a wealth of knowledge. And we're going to be talking about common misconceptions when it comes to immune supplements. And these days, the market is flooded with immune supplements. In your opinion, what are the best immune supplements that we should be taking to boost immunity?
A good walk with your beloved friends or partners. That's probably the most important supplement that we could take.
I agree.
However, I don't think that's really answering the question that you're asking me. It does address that the most important thing that we need to work on is what's going on up here. So let me talk about up here first. When people think about an immune supplement, they may think, oh, let me talk about elderberry, or let me talk about vitamin C or zinc or whatever, selenium or whatever. But in reality, we must first address the mind. And with that, there is a linkage that we need to address, which is our linkage with nature. And I look out here because out there is a forest. And studies show that people who are in hospitals who have even a tree outside their window that they can gaze upon. And I noticed the window behind you, which is not a window, but a drawing, that can have a similar effect on your nervous system as reminding you of the grandeur of the creation. And so as far as a supplement is concerned, we must first get nature, and we must then address what happens when we get into nature, which is that we feel part of something much bigger than just our limited selves, right? So in terms of consciousness, then we have some of the simplest of herbs or supplements that can address the mind. And if I were to ask, first, the diet is, of course, extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we're eating processed food, 90% in the United States of our food dollars, and I'll repeat that, 90% of our food dollars in the United States are spent on processed food. And what is processed food? It's fractionated food. It's food that no longer holds together all of the integral and important parts of the food. And this is going to be a key part of our discussions, because when we're looking at an immune supplement, like what most people will think of, like vitamin C, vitamin C doesn't really exist as we think it does. When we take a vitamin C tablet, which says vitamin C on it, it's actually, for the most part, pure isolated chemical called ascorbic acid. And ascorbic acid is not vitamin C. Vitamin C is this group of factors P and J and K and rutin and bioflavonoids that exist as part of a whole being. That's nature. So when we take a walk in nature, it's very, very different. And that's how we are connecting with something bigger and reminding our bodies that we are part of something much bigger. One of the first things I think about is, when it comes to the mind, is getting outside and being in nature and then feeling connected with a loved one. And then also addressing the mind from a more acute level in the realm of food within the vast field of food choices. There's a select group of foods that are the richest in compounds that will protect us and heal us and restore us. And those are our herbs. Those are the elements that take care of us. So Andrea, if I were to ask 95 out of 100 people, even on the streets here, If you were to drink a cup of chamomile tea, how is it going to make you feel? At least 9 out of 10 people would say, it's going to calm me down. That's why it's the number 2 or 3 most popular herb in the world, next to green tea, because green tea is going to uplift you, is going to energize you. Chamomile is going to soothe you. So in an era that we're living in of a pandemic and of insanity and these things which are in danger of ruling our lives, an herb like chamomile is one of the most critical agents to support immunity. And then, but the key, like the whole field, and food for that matter, just like food is fractionated and food is reduced, our herbs are often not what we think they are. So let's look at, for example, we're talking about chamomile, okay? So it wasn't necessarily what people were thinking I would say, because they were thinking, oh, you'd say things like elderberry or echinacea or astragalus or andrographis or any one of these other immune herbs. But what we're talking about here with regard to the mind and an herb like chamomile is we're talking about an herb which is going to soothe and ease the body. And that's the most, once you're in fight or flight, Andrea, you know this, if you're in fight or flight, your immune system is going to be compromised because you're thinking about how do I get away from the tiger? You're not thinking about some microscopic element that you've got some time to respond to. So the most important immune supplements that we can take is to make sure that we first take care of our mind. And one of the simplest, safest ways to do that. But the angel, as I say, is also in the dose. In that if you take a little tea bag of chamomile, and by the way, just like the United States Pharmacopoeia did a study of elderberry products and found the vast majority of them were not what they claimed to be, or had so little of the anthocyanidins, the important compounds, that what happens is it has little to no effect. So when you are using chamomile, it has to have the right levels of certain compounds that the company needs to study, like apigenin, for example, or luteolin. These are important compounds called flavonoids. And these are the compounds, the polyphenols. These are the compounds. As or more important, people hear about vitamin D as a supplement for immunity or vitamin C, as I said. But what people really need to be paying attention to are these compounds called polyphenols. According to most experts, we're getting enough vitamins and minerals. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people, especially if you're eating 90% of your diet's processed food, it's questionable. But even more deficient are these polyphenols that are up to 100 times more potent, according to the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. About 6 or 7 years ago, concluded up to 100 times more potent. So those are the compounds in your chamomile, for example. Or if you're looking at many other herbs that might be more understood to have an impact on immunity, you're going to be absolutely want to see from whoever you're buying it from what the levels of these polyphenols or active compounds are. So I start with chamomile as an herb, for example, and then other flowers can have a dramatic influence on our mind-body state. And then what we're going to also need to pay attention to is our herbs that are particularly rich in these polyphenols. One of the herbs that I've become really excited about is an herb called Cistus and Canis. And we could talk more about that in a few minutes.
Yeah. And, so many gems there, what you're saying. I am taking notes as you're speaking. So I'm going to look down at my notes because I kind of want to dissect a little bit about what you said. So first of all, the nature piece, absolutely. And forest bathing, so important you're talking about mind, body and spirit. So that really helps with the mind and helps to clear ourselves and just relax us, right? So putting us into that state where our body can do what it needs to do. So, and I think that's what you're trying to get at, is that we don't have the mental, emotional component down and our nervous system isn't calmed. How can we actually fight off or do anything to do it? So I love that you said that. And actually that was a brilliant answer and one that you don't hear very often. So you're very right about that. The other thing I want to say is that, you're talking about synergy. So, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm understanding is that you're saying when you're taking these isolates, they shouldn't be isolates. They should be synergistic. They should be in their natural state. So you mentioned vitamin C. You're talking about amla, right? You're talking about that it comes in the form of that it's made in nature. So what I hear you saying is that we're actually going to absorb it better when it comes in its natural state, right?
Not only are we, that's absolutely correct. And not only are we going to absorb it better, because absorption is what gets into the bloodstream. What we don't absorb has to be detoxified or has to be eliminated from the body. And even what we are absorbing, does that mean it's good that we're absorbing a huge amount of ascorbic acid? Right. What's that going to necessarily do for me? So it's more than just what we absorb, it's what our cells want. And one of the assays that I have been looking at products with is an assay called CAP-E, which basically is an assay which looks at, you can have an antioxidant, but if the antioxidant doesn't actually penetrate the cell and protect the mitochondria, right, the energy center of the cell, right, what good is it? And on top of that, if it's not helping you, your body, it's more work for the body to get rid of it. So true. My philosophy and the true philosophy of naturopathy is one that recognizes the wisdom of nature. And that's really, really critical. So when we look at immune supplements, again, I go first to what's going on up here, because we can all know this. Years and years ago, when I first took my first exam in 3rd grade or 4th grade, that scared me. I see you smiling, so I think you know where I'm going. Within seconds, I had to run to the bathroom for my first experience of what happens when I got scared. The gastrocolic reflex, my body says, okay, you're in trouble. You better start running. But I couldn't run. I could only run to the bathroom to get rid of what I didn't need so I could run faster. But now, since we're in a chronic state like that, and again, I am incredibly abbreviating a vast field of knowledge here with regard to immune supplements. But the other piece, there's 2 other pieces that need to be attended to. The second piece is your gut. Your gut is your second brain, right? So the moment you feel fear or the moment you feel love, you feel the connection with nature, or I feel afraid of what's in front of me, the first thing that happens is my body responds and my gut responds. So we must address the gut. And that's equally important to addressing what's going on in the mind. But the mind comes first, then the gut responds. So there are important immune supplements and that also influence the gut. And one of my favorites is using the microbial kingdom and what people are now know as fermentation or probiotics, and using correct technology to make the best fermentation process possible, and using the best pro, and then prebiotics, probiotics, and then create with those create a postbiotic with all of the jewels that's going to help nourish and restore and heal the gut. So when you're going through stress and you have to respond to a challenge, an immune challenge, your gut is now protected. And I can talk about a few of our best friends that are going to help us in that process.
Before you do, what I do want to ask you is, you mentioned vitamin C before, and we're talking about synergistic formulas, synergistic ingredients. So if we do want to take, going back to immunity, if we do want to take something, let's say like a vitamin C, what should we be taking? You mentioned amla. What are some other sources of vitamin C that we should be taking on a daily basis?
Thank you. I'd say one of the most important things that we don't want to take is too much ascorbic acid.
Right.
I think that's really, it cannot be overstated, because look at Andrea. Look at all the people running to the stores to buy huge amount of ascorbic acid. And if they knew that ascorbic acid is not vitamin C, and you know what? I actually printed this out.
So what is it if it's not vitamin C?
So let me read this to you. Okay. This is written by a Nobel Prize winner, a physiologist who discovered vitamin C around 1930. The deeper we go into the facets of life, the more mysteries we encounter. Analyzing living systems, we often have to pull them to pieces, decompose complex biological happenings into simple reactions. The smaller and simpler the system we study, the more it will satisfy the rules of physics and chemistry, the more we will understand it, but also the less alive it will be. So when we have broken down living systems to molecules and analyzed their behavior, we may kid ourselves into believing that we know what life is, forgetting that molecules have no life at all.
Wow. So
when we think about vitamin C, to me, one of my favorite herbs that I drink every day as a concentrated source of vitamin C is rose hips. And rose hips also have another one of these important protective compounds, like for your immune system, directly responsible for helping your immune system become wiser. And that constituent is called betulinic acid. Now, it's one of those molecules that by itself has no life at all. But when it's in the symphony, Andrea, of all of these compounds, that's when its music comes to life. And so rose hips is an example. Now, the other side of food we eat, rose hips is very concentrated and a wonderful healing agent. And just small amounts of it can have a very profound anti-inflammatory influence, which of course is very important relating to infection. However, in our diet, foods like broccoli are incredibly rich in vitamin C in the complexity of all of the compounds. So in the diet, you have foods like red pepper and broccoli, lemons, but on the concentrated side, where you get the biggest, quote unquote, bang for your buck, look at herbs like rose hips. And what's beautiful is my new favorite herb. I'm completely obsessed with this herb. It is, over the past year, I can't get enough of it, and I've been studying it and just learning so much about it as I can, is this herb called Cistus incanus. And when cistus, which has very high levels, has apparently about 32 different polyphenolic compounds, and many of these have been studied for their very profound immune effects. So you've got what's going on in the mind. I used an example of an herb like chamomile. If something going on in the gut, one of my favorite herbs for that, or foods for that, is flax, but it must be prepared in just the right way in order to be optimally effective. And then with regard to immunity, as we think of immunity, I wouldn't choose first, for example, elderberry or astragalus or andrographis. They're all fine. But for me, as a daily tonic, and that's really important, Andrea, as a daily tonic, Cistus and Canis has been drunk for probably thousands of years as a daily tonic. And it's one of these herbs that has immense protective capabilities for the human that's drinking it or absorbing it. And so when you combine Cistus and Canis with rose hips, you get this beautiful combination of synergy.
So where would we find it as consumers? Like, where would we find that herb? Is it a drink that you take? You mentioned tonic. Does it come already prepared? How can we get our hands on a herb like that?
It's a great question. Now, what's amazing is if you were in Greece or in Bulgaria or in Poland, it would be all over the place.
Interesting. Okay.
Here, it's almost you know, even many of my colleagues who are master herbalists, they've never even heard of it. As I had not heard of it up until a year or two ago. So in the United States, it's just not around. Or if it is, you have to do a internet search just for that one herb. And what, just like every other herb that I've just about studied, the quality can go from non-existent to exquisite. Yeah. And so that's the challenge here, is to get an herb that is high quality, that's been studied, and then measure it in a clinical study. And that's basically what I spend my waking hours doing.
Paul, you mentioned elderberry before, and I've read the research on elderberry and its ability to help with immunity. What are your thoughts on it?
I have, like so many of our long regarded herbs and foods, elderberry has a revered place. I think it can, especially it's the kind of supplement that one might take in a more acute situation. Everything I said about elderberry is true, that it's a revered and wonderful herb to use, but one would want to be mindful during a more critical situation. There is controversy over whether it might be more stimulating to an immune response than might be desirable. And so I would pay heed to that concern, where it's not something that you'd want to necessarily drink every day, elderberry tea. It's more medicinal by nature, but then it's also controversial if you use it medicinally. So from my perspective, I would recommend, and especially because elderberry's quality especially on the US market, is also controversial. The United States Pharmacopoeia, as I mentioned earlier in our other discussion, has rated, and Consumer Reports Consumer Union did a scathing report on the quality of elderberry in the market, where the cost range was prohibitive in some cases for what you were getting. And then the quality wasn't even there in terms of active compounds. So if you're going to use elderberry, make sure you're using one that's been clinically studied and that your healthcare informed practitioner can give you some experience with that. All that said, I would steer more towards some of the foods or herbs that I enjoy and know can be drunk on a daily basis. And that's where herbs like rose hips, for example, or Cistus and Canis, as I mentioned earlier, those are wonderful examples of herbs that I would use on a daily basis. Blackcurrant leaves, you taste them and they're just remarkable. Ginger, that's another example. I eat ginger many times each day, and I model myself aspiring to be more like a Confucius, Confucius apparently wouldn't leave a meal without ginger. I wrote a book on ginger 26 years ago. So to me, that's one of the ultimate immune supplements. You know what's interesting, Andrea, because it does address not just directly immunity, it works on the gut and it works on the mind. So ginger is uplifting. It makes you feel, even if you're kind of dull and you know that feeling, just chew on some fresh ginger and you lighten up. And so I would use that in a tea form on a regular basis, along with herbs like cistus and rose hips.
Paul, I have a question for you regarding delivery system. So a lot of us have pill fatigue at this point because, being over the last 6-7 months. What are your thoughts on a gummy delivery system, like gummies?
Great question. So I understand why people want things to taste good. That's understandable. I grew up on sugar. I had sugar, refined sugar, at every meal. And a meal wasn't complete for me growing up. And I could show you my teeth, and you'd see the proof of my upbringing. The numbers of cavities that I have outnumber the numbers of teeth that I have. I grew up on sugar, and sugar is a problem. Now, you talk about an oxymoron, sugar and immunity. Sugar is basically refined sugar is like a drug. It's highly addictive. It doesn't deliver on its promise to give you long-term sustained energy. And what's, I don't know, disconcerting at best is putting small doses of, hopefully, and I say hopefully, an herb or a fruit like elderberry. I've seen these elderberry gummies. It's like, it's just, to me, it's an oxymoron. All that said, it's probably better than not. But if I have a choice, my choice would be the way our ancestors would use the delivery, would be to make teas. And for medicinal or for therapeutics, they would use what's called infusions. And infusions usually use larger quantities and or steep for longer periods of time. And then you could add lemon or honey and then make it incredibly flavorful. And the beauty of, or the benefit of a gummy, for example, is you are bathing the entry to your immune system, which is your oral cavity, and your tonsils are sending signals throughout your whole physiology. Oh, something good is coming in here, and alerting your immune cells, like your monocytes, which are gonna be part of your innate immune response to say, oh, you better go out and check and make sure everything's okay. And so the monocytes can go and leave the bloodstream. And the way we do that is we signal with a tea, for example, or an infusion. And so, but when I mentioned our last conversation, Andrea, like an herb like chamomile or a herb like cistus, the studies show we need fairly meaningful quantities of these herbs. So you need like 5 grams, which is like 3 tea bags of chamomile, to have a profound effect that actually influences key markers of biodiversity in your gut. Now let me translate that for the listeners. Biodiversity on the skin, biodiversity in your gut is basically saying you're healthy. People, for example, who've gotten really sick from infections, like different viral infections, you see an alteration in key bacterial populations, which show you your diversity is down. You need a high level of diversity so that they all work in harmony and say, oh, there's a bad actor here. Let's all keep that bad actor in check. So it's really, really important that in our delivery systems, that what we're using is one that is going to be safe, that's going to be not oxymoronic, like giving you huge amounts of sugar, which is potentially challenging to the immune system, and one that basically is sending a holistic message throughout the body.
You know, I've had really good experiences with gummies, and especially for my kids, they love taking it. And for people who don't want to swallow pills. So a lot of us have that pill fatigue. So taking a gummy form, a sugar-free gummy form that actually tastes really good and has those medicinal ingredients like you're talking about, and a significant amount of it, our body, from what I've read, from the research I've read, our body actually can absorb it quite readily. So I'm curious, you know, if you have any thoughts around that.
Thank you, Andrea, and I really appreciate the reminder that there are some products that are out there in the gummy class that are reputable and are potentially valuable. Having been in the supplement industry for 40 plus years or whatever, it's been a wonderful ride. I have seen a lot of great products, and I've seen a lot of products that don't live up to it. And I think one needs to be very, very mindful of the agents that are used to make it sweeter, and make sure that those agents are something that are going to be systemically valuable. And especially for kids, which is what you're mentioning, the benefits would far outweigh any downsides of using the products. That said, I got a sample a week or two ago of a gummy product that had 25 milligrams of a blueberry. It didn't even specify an extract of blueberry. They put blueberries in a big matrix of glucose syrup, and it was promoted as a health supplement delivering the health benefits of blueberries. They did that with ascorbic acid, as I mentioned earlier. Ascorbic acid was a major brand of acerola vitamin C, and it had 1,000 milligrams of ascorbic acid and 50 milligrams of acerola I didn't know where it was coming from. That's the kind of chicanery, in my judgment, which one needs to be careful about. There is the issue with sweeteners that some of these are chemical sweeteners and or highly refined. And you just don't know what the long-term influence of them is going to be. So yeah, there might be short-term studies showing that this might be beneficial, but I always would apply what I consider to be one of the most important principles, which is common sense. If you have a hard time pronouncing the ingredient or understanding where it's coming from or how it's produced, then I would just be careful about that. But the amount of gummies that are on the market right now and the amount of sugar that people are consuming, it's like they're just eating them like they're candy, and they are candy for the most part. So, but does that mean someone can't produce a very beneficial gummy? Probably not. Somebody can. So I thank you for that question.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, I have one more question for you, and we're just going to wrap up today's interview with: what should consumers be aware of? What should they look for when they're going to the store? They're looking at the shelves at the store and they want to buy an immune supplement. Something that you didn't touch upon that you still want to share with all of our viewers.
It's a great question, Andrea. And when I had my first health food store in 1979, and I have been since the early 70s an avid student in our field. And customers would come from a distance to ask me as a person that was working in the store what I would counsel, what I would recommend. At a certain point, that's all they really wanted to know was, what do you recommend? So someone like yourself, Andrea, if you were working in the store, I would say, listen to Andrea. Andrea is going to guide you right. So if you're going into a store to buy your supplement, find out what the level of education or commitment,
knowledge of the staff.
Thank you. The knowledge of the staff.
Yeah.
And then again, there's an old saying that you would want to also, I'm going to screw this up because I can't remember exactly what the proverb is, but essentially you want to be sure that even though the person on the floor has integrity and is educated and so forth, may have a degree, pharmacist, or even a doctor, what you want to be able to do is get the certificates of analysis on the product. And have they done clinical studies on the product? That's probably the most important question. Have they done preclinical, clinical studies on the product and show me the C of A? It's really simple. And a good store shouldn't have 200 different brands. You don't need that. You have just a few brands that will show you, here's my clinical, preclinical, and here's my C of A on that product. And I'm using the product. That's the other piece. I would always tell my customers, I'm drinking this every day.
Yeah, comes from personal.
And look, I feel great. I've been using it for 10 years now. And everybody that I've recommended it to has had, or most people have had really good results. So that's the most important thing. But then if you are a geek like me, then what you're going to do is when you go to the store, you're also going to be sure that you do your homework and you study and you look at the National Library of Medicine. So you want to be careful about some blogs, for example, which might recommend that you take huge amounts of elderberry or huge amounts of whatever product that a company might be selling, and then go to the National Library of Medicine and review the literature as best as you can as a geek. And then if you're not a true geek, or if you are, go to your doctor colleague, your partner in your health, and ask her or him, what do they think about this battery of studies about this particular supplement? And once they give you that feedback, then I think you're making a good choice.
Thank you so much for doing today's interview.
Always a joy.
Stay tuned for video number 3 in this series, where Paul explains about the powerful compounds found in whole herbs. To find the notes from this episode, as well as more insights and resources about immunity, visit paulschulick.com.